Part 1. The Quiet Rancher and the Winds of Fate. The town of Dry Creek was a place that existed on the edge of memory and dust, where the wind carried more secrets than the people did. Its wooden buildings leaned in different directions, as if worn down by years of sun, wind, and the occasional storm. The streets were wide enough for wagons and cattle to pass, but narrow enough that voices carried, sharp and biting. It was a place where a man's reputation could be destroyed with a single laugh or elevated with a single act of courage. Silas Harper lived at the farthest edge of Dry Creek, where the town faded into the rolling prairie. His cabin was small, with walls darkened by smoke and years, a roof patched with worn shingles, and a door that creaked in protest whenever the wind pushed against it. He was a man of 35 years, with a broad chest, strong arms, and a back curved slightly from years of labor. His hair, black and unkempt, often fell over his sharp eyes, which observed everything with a quiet attentiveness. Despite his physical strength, Silas was not like the other men of Dry Creek. He did not drink, did not gamble, and never spoke loudly to claim attention. The ranch hands in town called him Greenhorn behind his back, or laughed openly at the thought of his innocence with women. He had never known love, never known intimacy. While others boasted of their conquests, Silas worked the land, mended fences, and tended cattle, finding solace in the rhythm of honest labor. And yet, beneath that stoic exterior, loneliness grew like weeds in the cracks of his soul. He watched other men with women in town, their laughter spilling across the dusty streets, and felt a pang he could neither speak nor soothe. He was not bitter. He was simply alone. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, Silas rode along the ridge that bordered his land. His horse, a chestnut mare named Whisper, moved with careful surety, ears twitching at every sound. Silas scanned the horizon, noting the jagged silhouette of the distant mountains and the curling smoke of evening fires in neighboring homesteads. That was when he saw it, a thin spiral of smoke rising from the creek that ran through his property. He guided Whisper down the slope, wary but curious. As he approached, the air carried the smell of scorched earth and singed hair. There, tangled in the roots of an upturned tree and half hidden by brush, was a young woman. Her horse lay dead a few feet away, and a crimson stain marred the fabric of her side. She was small but lithe, with dark hair cascading in waves around her shoulders, and eyes that held both fire and fear. Silas dismounted, moving slowly to avoid startling her. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, voice low and steady. "Can I help?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she shook her head. Pride and fear battled in her gaze. But when she lifted a trembling hand, he saw the silent plea, the unspoken surrender. He lifted her gently into his arms, careful not to touch her wound, and carried her to the cabin. Inside, he set her on the cot, removing her torn cloak and offering water. "You've been hurt badly," he said. "I can fix this, but you must let me." She studied him with sharp eyes, gauging his intent. "And why should I trust a stranger?" she asked, voice low but firm. "Because you have no other choice," he replied softly, with the hint of a smile that did not mock her, only offered calm. Her name, he learned, was Naeli. She was Apache, from a tribe long scattered by encroaching settlers and battles with rival groups. She had been traveling alone, scouting a route for her small band when they were ambushed. Her horse was killed, and she narrowly escaped with her life. She carried pride and resilience like armor, yet in her wound and weariness, she was vulnerable. Silas tended her injuries with the care of a man who had never been trained, yet knew that gentleness could heal more than skill. He boiled water, ground herbs he had gathered for generations, and carefully wrapped her side with strips of cloth torn from old bedding. Naeli watched silently, noting how he worked, not with haste, not with self-importance, but with patience that seemed almost sacred. Days passed. Nayeli's strength returned gradually. She learned the rhythm of his world, the slow, deliberate pace of ranch work, the quiet respect he paid to the land, the way he never boasted of his skill or strength. In her tribe, men were measured by courage in battle or skill with weapons. Here, she saw courage in the stillness of a man who faced the harshness of the prairie each day without complaint. By the time Nayeli could walk freely again, the bond between them had begun. They explored the edges of his property, talking in low tones, sharing pieces of their lives. She asked why he lived alone, why the town mocked him. He laughed softly, brushing dust from his hat, and admitted the truth. He had never known a woman intimately. He expected her to scoff, perhaps to ridicule him as the town did, but Nayeli did neither. Instead, she tilted her head and regarded him with a quiet awe. "A heart kept pure is not weakness," she said one evening, as the sun set behind the ridge. "It is a gift. If given to the right one, it can be stronger than all the boasting in the world." Word of Nayeli's presence spread slowly. First, a few women in town whispered about her riding along the ridge, walking beside the quiet rancher. Then the men began to notice, their mockery faltering. How could this proud Apache woman, strong, independent, fierce, choose a man they had ridiculed for years? When she walked openly with him through the town square, resting her hand lightly on his arm, whispers turned into stunned silence. Men who had jeered now averted their eyes. Others could not believe what they saw. Nayeli did not parade her choice, yet she did not hide it. She carried herself with dignity, as though daring the town to challenge the truth she had seen in Silas. Evenings were spent by the fire, sharing stories. Nayeli spoke of battles, of loyalty, of her people's struggles, and of honor lost and regained. Silas listened, not to counter, not to impress, but to understand. And in that listening, Nayeli found a rare comfort, a quiet safety. He did not pretend to know her world. He respected it, valued it, and in his steadiness, she began to trust fully. Part 2. Whispers in Dry Creek winter had passed, leaving the prairie alive with green shoots and the delicate scent of wildflowers. The creek ran full from the thaw, and Silas's land began to hum with renewed life. Yet the town of Dry Creek did not so easily forget. The sight of Nayeli walking beside Silas became the subject of hushed conversations and overt gossip. Inside the saloon, where the scent of whiskey and sweat mingled with the tang of horses tied outside, the men gathered in low groups. They cast glances toward the square, muttering to one another. "I swear, did you see her?" muttered Tom Higgins, a burly ranch hand with a thick neck and a bristling mustache. "The Apache girl, walking beside Greenhorn Harper." "Who'd have thought?" "Never thought I'd see it," replied another, spitting into the dirt. "And he ain't braggin' neither. Quiet as a tomb, that one. Makes me mad just watchin' him." Madness and envy rippled through the saloon. The men prided themselves on strength, on conquests, on the ability to command attention. Silas had none of these qualities, at least none that could be measured by their standards. And yet Nayeli, proud and fierce, had chosen him. Outside, Silas and Nayeli continued their work, undisturbed by gossip. Together, they repaired fences, guided cattle, and tended to the small vegetable plots Silas had kept for years. Nayeli had learned quickly, mastering the art of riding, handling livestock, and even mending torn cloth. She moved with a grace born of both necessity and pride, and Silas watched her silently, admiration warming his chest. One afternoon, as they drove a small herd of cattle toward the creek for water, Nayeli spoke of her people. "My tribe," she said, shading her eyes against the sun, "we believe every river has a spirit. This one, it's gentle, but it watches, always watching. Be careful, Silas. Sometimes it is kind, sometimes it tests you." Silas frowned thoughtfully. "I've seen the creek swell after storms, heard the ice crack in winter. I reckon it tests all of us. But we learn, don't we? We learn patience. We learn care." She glanced at him, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. You learn, yes. But you also teach, though you do not know it. You teach patience to those who cannot see it in themselves. He felt a warmth spread through his chest. Her words carried a weight, a recognition that he had never sought but always desired. Meanwhile, the town continued to observe. The mockery lessened not because it ended, but because no words could dismantle what they saw. Nayeli and Silas moved through the town square as if the whispers were merely wind, brushing past them without resistance. When a man approached with a sneer, hoping to provoke, Nayeli's gaze would meet his and hold him in place. One evening, at the general store, a confrontation finally came. A tall man, Red McAllister, stepped forward as Nayeli selected flour and dried beans for the week. I don't rightly understand it, he said, voice loud enough to carry across the room. You're a woman who could choose any man in town. Why him? Nayeli turned, placing the goods on the counter, and met his eyes calmly. Because he is honest, she said. Because he listens. Because he does not pretend to be something he is not. That is more than any man here has ever shown. Red's face reddened. You think we're all liars? I think many of you speak louder than you act, she replied evenly. And some of you act without thought. That is why I choose him. The store grew silent. Some townsfolk averted their eyes, embarrassed for Red. Others exchanged uncertain glances, the realization dawning that mockery could not undo choice, nor courage hidden in quiet humility. At home, Silas and Nayeli continued to thrive in their shared life. He taught her how to plant seeds in furrows deep enough for rain, how to patch fences so that cattle could not slip through, how to gauge the health of the livestock by the gloss of their coats and the sparkle of their eyes. She taught him her songs, melodies that told stories of her ancestors, of warriors, hunters, and women who bore burdens with fierce pride. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, she sang a song of lost lands and wandering spirits. Silas listened, captivated. Your people have a way of making pain sound beautiful, he said quietly. It is not beauty, she replied. It is remembrance. We sing so that we do not forget, so that the land and those who came before us live in our hearts. And now, Silas, you are part of that memory. The following spring, an incident tested their courage and trust. A wild stallion had escaped from a neighboring ranch, running amok across Silas's property. The animal was powerful, fierce, and unpredictable. Nayeli spotted it first, her keen eyes tracking its path. We cannot let it roam, she said. It will destroy your fences, the crops, maybe even the cattle. Silas nodded. Then we must catch it. Together they approached the stallion slowly, moving with the patience that had marked their days together. The animal snorted, pawed the ground, and reared, its eyes wild. Nayeli whispered to it in the Apache tongue, a low hum of words that seemed to carry authority and calm. Silas mirrored her movements, steady and deliberate, offering no sudden threat. After tense moments, the stallion settled, recognizing neither master nor servant, but two beings who moved with care and understanding. Together they guided it back to the corral, securing it without harm. The feat did not go unnoticed. Townsfolk who had come to check the progress of the herd watched silently from a distance, witnessing the harmony between the pair. By summer, the couple's reputation had transformed. Silas was no longer merely the quiet rancher, nor Nayeli merely the proud Apache woman. Together they embodied a different kind of strength, one not measured by gunfire, boasting, or brute force, but by patience, loyalty, courage and gentleness, and steadfast hearts. Yet life in the West was never without danger. One hot afternoon, a band of horse thieves passed through the outskirts of town, targeting isolated homesteads. Word reached Dry Creek that the gang had taken supplies and threatened families along the prairie trail. Silas and Nayeli knew their land might be next. That evening, they prepared. Silas secured the cabin and reinforced the fences, while Nayeli gathered water and sharpened tools that could serve as weapons if necessary. When the gang arrived under the cover of dusk, expecting an easy raid, they were met with a pair who moved with precision and resolve. Silas confronted them with calm authority. "You will not take what belongs here," he said. "Turn back and leave the people of this land in peace." The gang laughed, brandishing weapons. Yet Nayeli stepped forward, voice strong and unwavering. "We are not weak because we live quietly," she said. "You may have strength in numbers, but we have courage in truth. Leave now." Something in her tone, in the steadfast presence of both of them, caused the gang to hesitate. They had expected a timid man and a frightened woman. They found neither. After a tense standoff, they turned and rode off into the twilight, leaving the prairie undisturbed. The town, hearing of the encounter, began to whisper again, but this time with respect. Silas and Nayeli had defended their home, not with prideful boasting, but with courage that came naturally from their hearts. The same men who had once mocked Silas now nodded as he rode past. The women whispered, "She has chosen wisely." And so life continued. Seasons changed, bringing rains, harvests, snow, and heat. Silas and Nayeli worked side by side, tending cattle, planting crops, teaching one another, and finding joy in the quiet moments. A shared meal by the creek, a song sung beneath the stars, the simple satisfaction of a fence repaired, and cattle guided safely to pasture. The bond between them grew unbreakable. Children were born, filling the cabin with laughter, their footsteps running across the worn wooden floors. Nayeli's songs filled the rooms, blending with Silas's soft hums as he worked. Together, they taught the children respect for the land, for truth, for patience, and for one another. In the town, whispers shifted once more. Dry Creek had learned a new lesson, that strength was not only in the loud, the boastful, or the brash. True courage, true love, and true honor often lived quietly, hidden in patience and humility. And those who had once mocked Silas and Nayeli could do nothing but watch, silently, as their example endured. Part 3. Seasons of Change. The prairie had a way of teaching patience. Each day, the sun rose relentlessly, painting the land in gold and copper hues, only to be chased by evening shadows that crept slowly across the hills. Silas and Nayeli had come to understand this rhythm, moving in step with the land, its trials, and its quiet lessons. Summer gave way to fall, and the harvest brought both work and celebration. Silas's small plot of vegetables had grown lush under their combined care, and the cattle were fat and healthy, ready to be driven to market. Nayeli, ever diligent, sang to the children as they helped carry baskets of corn and squash, her voice floating across the fields like a warm wind. In town, Dry Creek's folk watched them with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. Some of the older men, who had once laughed openly at Silas's innocence, now spoke quietly of his perseverance. "Never thought the quiet one would last this long," muttered Old Man Jenkins, who ran the blacksmith shop. "But look at him now, solid as a rock. And that Apache woman? She's strong as a winter wind. Together, well, I'll be damned if they don't belong," young boys whispered among themselves, daring each other to approach the ranch, while women nodded approvingly at the careful way Nayeli guided her children and tended the land. Even the saloon, once a den of ridicule, had grown quieter, its patrons catching glimpses of the couple's dignity and strength. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge, dust rising behind him in a silver cloud. He rode with urgency, stopping just beyond the boundary of Silas's property. His horse huffed, sweat streaming down its flanks, and the rider waved frantically. Silas approached cautiously. "What brings you here in such haste?" he called. The rider dismounted, wiping his brow. "It's the Blakely gang, sir. They're headed this way, hitting farms east of here. Word is they're armed and dangerous. They've taken horses, supplies, and they don't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." Nayeli's eyes narrowed. "Then we must prepare. They won't find us easy prey." Silas nodded. We won't give them a reason to. Let's make sure the land and our family are safe. For the next 2 days, Silas and Naili reinforced fences, hid supplies, and trained their children in basic caution. Not fear, but awareness. They knew the gang would test them, and they wanted to ensure that strength and courage flowed in the next generation, even if it came quietly. When the gang finally arrived under cover of dusk, expecting a simple raid, they found themselves met with more than 2 defenders. Silas had rigged traps along the perimeter, warning signals to alert them if anyone tried to enter, and Naili had planned careful maneuvers that made every approach risky. The gang, expecting an easy target, paused. "You're not alone," Silas called, stepping into the moonlight. His broad shoulders cast long shadows, the flicker of firelight from the cabin illuminating his face. Nayeli appeared beside him, her stance firm, her hand resting on a heavy staff they had sharpened for defense. "Leave now," she said. "There's no victory here for you. Only pain and trouble. Turn back." The gang laughed, but unease grew in their ranks. The couple moved with quiet precision, their confidence in each other evident in every gesture. Even the bravest outlaw hesitated before attempting anything foolish. And after tense moments, the gang retreated, leaving the prairie and the family undisturbed. Word of the encounter traveled quickly through Dry Creek. The same men who had once mocked Silas now tipped their hats as he passed. Women whispered admiration for Nayeli's courage, marveling at how a woman so proud could combine wisdom with action. Autumn deepened, bringing cooler winds and long nights. The couple spent more time around the hearth, teaching their children, sharing stories, and reflecting on the life they had built. Nayeli sang of rivers, winds, and ancestors. Silas spoke of cattle, crops, and the subtle wisdom the land had taught him. Each night, their children slept soundly, lulled by the harmony of 2 worlds coming together, a man of quiet labor and a woman of fierce spirit. One evening, as the first frost touched the tips of the cottonwoods, Nayeli asked, "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been without me?" Silas thought for a moment, watching the frost glitter on the creek. "I'd have survived," he said slowly, "but I'd have been alone. There'd be no songs in the house, no warmth at night, nothing to measure against the cold wind. You brought life to this land, Nayeli, not just to me, but to everything here." Her dark eyes softened. "And you brought me safety, Silas. Something I never thought I could find. You showed me that courage isn't only in fighting battles, but in living faithfully, quietly, and true." That winter, snow blanketed the prairie. The children learned to track animal prints, to chop wood safely, and to feed the livestock without injury. Silas and Nayeli worked together seamlessly, their partnership forged in trust, skill, and mutual respect. And in the evenings, they told stories around the fire, stories of Apache ancestors, of prairie life, of townsfolk who tested their strength and found their courage. By spring, the children were old enough to ride alongside their parents, guiding cattle to pasture, helping with chores and learning the songs of their mother's people. Nayeli taught them the language of her ancestors, explaining meanings behind every phrase, every melody. Silas taught them to ride, to mend fences, and to respect the slow rhythm of the land. Their family became a living lesson for the town, a demonstration that true strength was quiet, steadfast, and unwavering. Even neighbors who had once doubted Silas's abilities came to respect him. A wandering carpenter, passing through the town, remarked, "I've seen men claim the prairie as their own, but rarely a man so quietly in control. He does not shout, yet the land obeys him." Nayeli's influence was equally profound. Women in Dry Creek began asking her advice, learning her songs, watching the careful way she handled both children and livestock. Men who had once mocked her courage came to see it as strength that complemented Silas's quiet resolve. One afternoon, as the children played along the creek, a stranger approached the cabin. He was an older man, grizzled, with eyes that had seen the West in its harshest form. "I hear tell of a rancher and an Apache woman," he said, studying the home. "They say you two stand together, stronger than anyone in town. Is it true?" Silas looked to Nayeli, who nodded slightly. "It is true," he said. "We live as we must, honestly, with care and with courage when required." The stranger smiled, tipping his hat. "Then may your lives be long and your hearts strong. Not many can do what you do, and fewer still can do it together." As seasons passed, Dry Creek slowly changed. New families arrived, drawn by the reputation of a town where courage was measured not by boastfulness, but by character. Children grew up learning respect for the quiet, the steady, and the true. And Silas and Nayeli, through patience, diligence, and love, had created a legacy that would endure long after their own days ended. The prairie wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying tales of courage, loyalty, and enduring love. Travelers passing through the town often paused, watching the rancher and the Apache woman as they worked together, a living testament to the idea that life measured in kindness, steadfastness, and mutual respect was the strongest life of all. Part 4. Trials of the Prairie. The following spring, the prairie stirred with new life. Grass stretched tall and green, and wildflowers dotted the hillsides like spilled jewels. Silas and Nayeli had become inseparable, not only in love, but in labor. Their mornings began before sunrise. Silas guided the horses to pasture, while Nayeli tended the small orchard and checked on the vegetable patch. Their children, now old enough to help, ran alongside them, laughing at the chill in the morning air, learning the ways of the land with every step. Yet life on the frontier was never easy. One morning, while Silas was checking fences near the northern ridge, he noticed tracks that made his heart tighten. Wolves had come down from the hills, their prints deep in the soft earth, circling the edge of his herd. He whistled softly, signaling to Nayeli, who approached with a keen eye. "They are not far," she said, her voice steady. "We cannot fight them all, but we can protect the young ones together." They gathered the calves and moved them closer to the barn, securing gates and lighting small fires along the perimeter to deter the predators. Nayeli sang low, haunting melodies in her native tongue, her voice weaving through the morning mist, calming both animals and children. Silas stood nearby, keeping watch with a rifle ready but never raised unless necessary. The wolves, wary of human resolve and the strange song that carried through the air, finally retreated. Silas exhaled slowly, his heart still racing. Nayeli placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes soft but resolute. "You see," she said, "patience and courage together can face what brute strength alone cannot." Word of the wolf encounter spread quietly through Dry Creek. Townsfolk no longer whispered of Silas's innocence. They spoke of his wisdom, his steady hand, and the remarkable partnership he had forged with Nayeli. Even Red McAllister, once a vocal critic, now nodded when Silas passed him on the main street, a silent acknowledgement of respect. Summer brought new challenges. Drought threatened the land. The creek that had once flowed generously now trickled in shallow rivulets. Cattle grew restless, crops wilted under the relentless sun, and the town began to worry about their survival. Silas and Nayeli worked tirelessly, rationing water, digging trenches to catch runoff, and using every technique they had learned over the years to protect their homestead. One evening, as they repaired a fence near the edge of the pasture, Nayeli paused and looked out over the parched land. "It is hard," she said softly. "Even the land suffers, and yet we must endure." Silas nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "The land teaches us to be patient, Nayeli. It tests us, yes, but it also rewards careful hands and steady hearts." Nayeli placed her hand on his, the gesture silent but full of meaning. "And together, we endure more than either of us could alone." It was during this harsh summer that an itinerant preacher arrived in Dry Creek. He was a tall, gaunt man, with a voice that carried like a bell through the town square. He preached to anyone who would listen, extolling virtues of honesty, courage, and community. Silas and Nayeli listened politely, intrigued by his words, but grounded in the lessons of their own lives. "You live the sermon every day," the preacher told them one morning. "Through work, through patience, through love. Few men and women in this land can say the same." Nayeli smiled. "We do what is necessary," she said. "Not for praise, but because it must be done." The preacher nodded solemnly. "And yet others will notice, even if slowly. You have set an example." Autumn arrived with a riot of colors. The prairie transformed into golds and crimsons, the winds carrying seeds and the scent of smoke from distant fires. Silas and Nayeli harvested the last of the crops, the children helping eagerly, laughing as the leaves swirled around them. Life had its hardships, but it also held profound beauty, a lesson that Silas had long understood, but Nayeli's presence had deepened. It was also during this autumn that a neighbor, old Mrs. Callahan, fell ill. She lived on the edge of town, isolated and frail. Silas and Nayeli visited her daily, bringing fresh water, food, and tending to her small cabin. Silas read to her, and Nayeli sang the soft Apache melodies that eased her mind. Through small acts of service, the couple showed that strength was measured not just in survival, but in compassion. By winter, the prairie was again blanketed in snow. The family spent long evenings by the fire, sharing stories of past winters, lessons learned, and dreams for the future. Silas often marveled at how much life they had built together, how their bond had weathered both mockery and threat, drought and predator. Nayeli, equally reflective, would often gaze into the flames, remembering the days she had arrived wounded and alone, and how far they had come together. A particularly harsh snowstorm trapped them in the cabin for several days. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows and piling snow against the door. Silas and Nayeli huddled close, keeping the fire alive and the children warm. The storm was a test of endurance, of resourcefulness, and of trust in one another. Silas chopped wood tirelessly, while Nayeli rationed food and tended to the small hearth with careful attention. During one long night, as the storm raged, Nayeli spoke quietly, her words almost lost in the wind. "Do you ever think, Silas, that life could have been different?" He looked into her eyes, seeing both the question and the unspoken fear behind it. "Different, perhaps," he said slowly. "But I would not trade this life for any other. Not with you, not with the children, not with the lessons we've learned." Nayeli nodded, pressing a hand to his cheek. "Then we endure, as we always have." Together as the storm passed, the prairie glistened under a clear, cold sun. Tracks of deer and rabbits crisscrossed the snow, and the creek shimmered as it resumed its flow. Life, harsh yet beautiful, continued. Spring returned once more, bringing new challenges and joys. A traveling troupe arrived in Dry Creek, performing songs and acts from towns beyond. The children begged to attend, and Silas and Nayeli consented, guiding them to the small gathering of tents. The troupe performed songs of distant lands, stories of adventure, and tales of bravery. Nayeli watched, fascinated, translating the words for the children, while Silas observed the performers' skill, quietly noting how practice and patience created mastery. Through these years, Silas and Nayeli became pillars of Dry Creek. Their homestead was a model of careful labor, courage, and harmony. Townsfolk sought their advice on disputes, livestock care, and conflict resolution. Their children grew up strong, knowledgeable, and kind, embodying the lessons of both parents. Even the skeptics, men who had once mocked Silas, could not ignore the truth. Quiet strength, coupled with intelligence, courage, and compassion, earned a respect that brashness and boasting could never match. And Nayeli, proud and wise, had shown that true love was not about conquest or appearances, but about understanding, patience, and choosing the right heart. Part 5. Years of the prairie spring had fully returned to the prairie. The winds carried the fragrance of new grass, of blooming sage, and of distant wildflowers whose colors painted the hillsides in brilliant patches of gold and crimson. Silas and Nayeli had settled into a rhythm, one dictated not by the town's opinion but by the land, their children, and each other. Their homestead had grown. A small barn had been added, along with a shed for tools and a root cellar dug carefully into the earth. The garden had expanded into a full vegetable plot, complete with beans, squash, and potatoes. Their cattle herd had doubled, and their horses were strong, patient, and reliable. Every structure, every fence, bore the mark of care and precision, as did every interaction between the family members. The children, now older, moved through the day like young apprentices of life. Nayeli taught them the Apache songs of their ancestors, explaining the meaning behind each word and melody. Silas taught them how to read the land, how to follow animal tracks, judge the weather by the clouds, and repair fences to keep the cattle safe. One afternoon, as Silas worked near the northern fence, he noticed a new set of tracks crossing the pasture. They were heavy, dragging slightly, suggesting a larger animal, or possibly human. He whistled softly, alerting Nayeli, who approached, her eyes sharp and observant. "Someone has been here recently," she said, "and not for a visit." Silas nodded. "We should investigate." Quietly, they followed the tracks together, moving with the patience that had defined them for years. The trail led to the creek, where they discovered signs of a small campsite, fresh footprints, a few scattered bones of a deer, and a fire pit not yet cold. Someone had been here, observing, perhaps planning. Nayeli's hand rested lightly on Silas's arm. "We must prepare." Not with anger, but with awareness. Over the next days, they reinforced the homestead's defenses. Small warning bells were hung along fences, and children were taught to alert silently if strangers approached. Silas and Nayeli moved with quiet confidence, not arrogance, ensuring the land and their family were safe. Dry Creek, meanwhile, had changed. The town was growing, slowly but steadily. New families arrived, drawn by the stories of a rancher and an Apache woman whose lives seemed intertwined with courage and wisdom. Children played in the streets, their laughter mingling with the calls of merchants and the clatter of horseshoes on the boardwalk. And through it all, Silas and Nayeli were often seen walking together, tending to their property or guiding the herd. Yet life on the frontier was never without threat. One summer evening, a fire broke out on a neighboring ranch, quickly spreading toward Silas's property. Smoke rose in thick plumes, carrying the acrid scent of burned wood and dry grass. Silas grabbed buckets and tools, rallying his children to form a line to the creek. Nayeli, ever strategic, organized the effort, moving with precision to protect the home and the barn. The flames approached hungrily, licking at dry grass and wooden posts. Silas and Nayeli worked tirelessly, pouring water, digging trenches, and guiding the children to safety. After hours of relentless labor, the fire was contained, leaving charred land, but no loss of life. Exhausted but unbroken, they sat together on a hill, watching the last embers die. "You see," Nayeli said, her voice soft but firm, "even when the world tries to take what we love, we endure. We endure together." Silas nodded, pulling her close. "And our family endures with us. That is more than any fire can touch. That winter brought snow heavier than any in memory. Drifts covered fences, and the creek froze solid. Silas and Nayeli worked side by side to ensure the animals were safe, moving cattle closer to shelter, clearing paths through the snow, and teaching the children to move carefully on the icy ground. One night, as the wind howled outside the cabin, Nayeli shared a story with the children of her ancestors, warriors and hunters, who had survived impossible winters. Silas added his own tales of the prairie, of storms weathered and beasts tamed. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls, and the children listened with rapt attention. "You see," Nayeli concluded, "strength is not always loud. It is steady. It is patient. It is choosing to care for those you love, even when the world tests you. The following spring, a band of horse thieves passed near Dry Creek, their eyes hungry for an easy score. They had heard of Silas and Niley's homestead, of its growing prosperity, and thought to take advantage of the family. Yet the couple was prepared. Warning bells rang as the thieves approached, and Silas, Nayeli, and the older children positioned themselves along the ridge, visible yet strategic. When the thieves arrived, they expected timid ranchers and frightened children. Instead, they found a family moving with precision, patience, and quiet authority. Nayeli stepped forward, her staff held firmly, eyes burning with calm fury. "Leave now," she commanded. "There is no victory here for you." The leader of the gang sneered, but even he felt the weight of conviction in her stance. Silas followed, rifle in hand, but lowered in demonstration of controlled strength. "Turn back," he said, "or leave the land, or you will face consequences." The thieves hesitated. They had underestimated not only the couple's skill, but the unity and courage of the family. After tense moments, they fled, leaving the prairie and the homestead untouched. The town, hearing of the encounter, spoke in hushed tones, the tales of bravery now spreading beyond the boundaries of Dry Creek. Years continued to pass. The children grew into capable young men and women, each carrying lessons learned from both parents. Silas and Nayeli aged gracefully, their bond unshaken, their love deepened by shared trials and triumphs. When strangers traveled through Dry Creek, they often stopped to observe the family at work. They watched as Silas and Nayeli guided cattle, repaired fences, and moved with quiet precision. They noted the children's ease with the land, their skill and awareness, and the calm authority that seemed to flow from the family as naturally as the wind across the prairie. And in the evenings, after the work was done, the family gathered around the hearth. Silas would tell of the prairie's lessons, Nayeli would sing the songs of her ancestors, and the children would ask questions, eager to understand the rhythms of life that had shaped them. The fire crackled, shadows danced, and the prairie beyond the cabin was alive with possibility, danger, and beauty. Through all these years, Silas's innocence, once a source of ridicule, remained intact, tempered by experience, but never lost. Nayeli's choice had not been made lightly, and it had proven wise. In a world that often valued loudness over substance, their life stood as proof that true strength lay in patience, courage, humility, and love. Part 6. The Winds of Change. The prairie, vast and unforgiving, never ceased its lessons. Silas and Nayeli had grown into their roles, not only as caretakers of their land, but as pillars of Dry Creek. Their homestead, once small and humble, had grown into a sprawling network of fences, barns, and pastures, each corner bearing the marks of patient labor. The children, now teenagers, were learning the responsibilities that came with life on the frontier. Their eldest, Thomas, had begun driving cattle under Silas's watchful eye. He moved with a steady patience, more like his father than any boy of his age had a right to. Marisol, Nayeli's first daughter, inherited her mother's quick mind and keen eyes. She could assess a situation in moments, whether tending the horses or reading the weather, and she often guided the younger children with gentle authority. Life was not without challenges. One spring, the prairie was hit by an unexpected late frost. Crops that had seemed ready for harvest shriveled overnight, and Silas and Nayeli spent days salvaging what they could. Even their livestock suffered. Newborn calves struggled to stay warm, and the family was forced to keep watch through long nights. Yet the hardship, while exhausting, never broke them. "We endure," Silas said one night, his voice low and steady as he covered a small calf with extra straw. "The prairie tests us, but it also teaches us." Nayeli nodded, brushing her daughter's hair from her face. Endurance is not only about survival. It is about patience, wisdom, and courage. Never forget that Dry Creek, too, was changing. New families arrived, drawn by the whispers of a rancher and an Apache woman who had carved a life of dignity and courage. With growth came tension. Some of the newcomers resented the reputation Silas and Nayeli had earned. Townsfolk who had once doubted the couple sometimes whispered behind closed doors, suggesting that their influence was overbearing. One afternoon, a newcomer, a wealthy rancher named Garrett Halloway, rode into town with an entourage. He was a tall man, loud and brash, his boots echoing on the wooden sidewalks. He had heard of Silas and Nayeli and their prospering homestead, and he had arrived with a proposition, or perhaps a challenge. "I hear tell," Halloway said loudly, addressing a small crowd in the square, "that a simple rancher and his companion, some Apache woman, have managed to claim the respect of this town. I find that hard to believe. Surely Dry Creek deserves a man of real power, not—" He paused, sneering. "A quiet laborer and his pet." The crowd shifted uneasily, glancing at Silas and Nayeli, whose eyes met calmly. Silas, tall and steady, stepped forward. "We work the land, mister." "Halloway, we care for our family. That is what earns respect here, not words." Nayeli's gaze was sharp, unwavering. "And your opinion, sir, does not change the truth. Strength is shown through deeds, not boasts." Halloway laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "We shall see, then, if deeds alone can stand against wealth and influence." In the weeks that followed, the tension between Halloway and the family became a subtle contest. He tried to buy land near their property, to lure their workers away, and even attempted to spread rumors in town. But Silas and Nayeli faced each challenge with quiet resolve. Each time Halloway escalated, the couple responded not with anger, but with demonstration of skill, kindness, and patience. They continued their work, protected their family, and earned the quiet admiration of all who watched. It was during this time that Nayeli shared more of her people's traditions with the children. Around the fire, she taught them songs of the wind and the hunt, explaining how the Apache had survived against impossible odds. She spoke of respect for the land, for animals, and for others. Silas added his own lessons of the prairie, blending their teachings into a curriculum of courage, diligence, and empathy. One late summer evening, the family gathered outside, watching a spectacular sunset. Thomas asked, "Father, why do people like Halloway come to challenge us? We've done nothing to provoke them." Silas looked out over the fields, the sky painted in deep reds and purples. "Some people cannot understand quiet strength. They measure life by noise, by conquest, by the flash of wealth. But that is not the measure of a man or a family. We are judged by our actions, and time will always reveal the truth." Nayeli added, her hand resting on Silas's shoulder, "And we endure. Together. That is the only lesson we need to know." As the seasons turned, Halloway attempted more aggressive measures. He sent men to disrupt their cattle drives and even tried to start fires along the property line. Each time, Silas and Nayeli countered with ingenuity and courage. They worked through the night to repair fences, patrolled the land in pairs, and taught their children to remain vigilant yet calm. Their reputation in town grew even stronger. By the following spring, Halloway realized that he could not undermine their influence. His wealth could not match the unity and endurance of a family grounded in respect, courage, and skill. Humiliated but wary of further conflict, he withdrew his efforts, leaving Silas, Nayeli, and their children to continue their work in peace. With the conflict behind them, life returned to its steady rhythm. The family's homestead flourished. The children learned new skills: horseback riding, animal husbandry, and the art of reading the land. Nayeli taught them medicinal herbs and the healing properties of plants, while Silas showed them the precision required in carpentry and fence building. The children grew strong, capable, and confident, reflecting the best of both parents. One quiet evening, as the prairie winds carried the scent of wildflowers and distant fires, Silas and Nayeli sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. "You know," Nayeli said softly, When I first arrived here, I did not expect to find this life. I thought I would wander, lost, until the world decided my fate for me. Silas took her hand, fingers entwining, and yet the world gave us each other. Our strength was not in solitude, but in partnership. That is what carried us through every trial. Nayeli smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. It is more than survival. It is life, full and true. And our children will carry this forward. As the years continued, Dry Creek grew, and the legend of the quiet rancher and the proud Apache woman spread across the region. Travelers spoke of a family who embodied patience, courage, and integrity. Children were taught to respect the land, to care for others, and to honor those who worked quietly yet steadfastly. Silas and Nayeli, once strangers bound by circumstance, had become more than partners. They were teachers, leaders, and the heart of a community. And through every trial, every harsh winter, every summer of drought, and every challenge from the outside world, their bond endured, unshakable and resolute. Part 7. Storms and Shadows. The years rolled on, and Dry Creek continued to grow around the family's homestead. Silas and Nayeli had become fixtures of the town, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of the land, the people, and the seasons. Their children, now moving from childhood into adolescence, had learned every lesson their parents had to offer. Yet the frontier always held surprises. One autumn, a particularly harsh storm rolled over the prairie. The winds ripped through fences, toppled a small barn, and brought icy rain that froze upon contact with the earth. Silas and Nayeli worked tirelessly, guiding their children in shoring up buildings, securing animals, and ensuring that no one was lost to the fury of the elements. "It's relentless," Thomas said, shivering as he struggled to hold a post upright. "I've never seen anything like this." Silas placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "The prairie is not cruel, it is honest. It shows us what we must endure and rewards those who respect its power." Nayeli added, "And we endure together. That is our strength. Remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to face it." By the storm's end, the family had lost some crops and a portion of the fence, but no lives were taken. They rebuilt over the following weeks, their children learning resilience and resourcefulness at every turn. The town, seeing their perseverance, began to rely on their guidance. Neighbors came for help, and Silas and Nayeli shared what knowledge they had gained over the years. With winter approaching, a new threat emerged: disease among the livestock. Cattle became ill, some calves grew weak, and panic threatened to take root in the community. Silas and Nayeli moved quickly, using every tool and lesson they had learned. Quarantining affected animals, administering herbal remedies from Nayeli's knowledge of Apache medicine, and calling on neighboring ranchers for advice. The work was exhausting, but it forged an unbreakable bond between the family and the town. By spring, the herd had recovered, stronger than before. Stories of their efforts spread far and wide, and Dry Creek became known not only as a growing settlement, but as a town guided by wisdom, patience, and courage. As the children grew older, Silas and Nayeli taught them not only survival skills, but also the importance of choice and morality. Marisol, learning from her mother, became adept at understanding people, when to trust, when to question, and when to act decisively. Thomas, like his father, learned the art of silent leadership, observing before acting, letting reason guide him more than impulse. One spring, an old acquaintance from Nayeli's past appeared on the prairie, a man who had once ridden with her tribe before it had scattered. His eyes, wary and searching, found Nayeli's. He brought news of Apache relatives far to the west, still struggling to survive against settlers and rival tribes alike. Nayeli listened intently, sharing stories of her own family, and in turn, the children absorbed the weight of history and responsibility that had shaped their mother. "This is why we endure," Nayeli explained to Silas later that evening. "Our actions, small as they may seem, ripple beyond our homestead. The land, the people, the children, They are all part of something larger than ourselves. Silas nodded, gazing at the fire. And together, we face it all. That is the lesson I want them to carry. Years passed, and with each season, new challenges arose. Fires in neighboring lands threatened to spread, bandits tested the outskirts of the prairie, and the ever-changing weather demanded constant vigilance. Yet through it all, Silas and Nayeli remained steadfast. Their children grew strong, their skill evident in every task, from riding and tending cattle to managing the homestead and guiding the community. The town, too, began to change. Some families moved in seeking work, inspired by the family's reputation. Others left, unable to match the frontier's demands. But the stories of Silas and Nayeli's endurance and courage persisted, whispered among travelers, sung in song, and etched into the town's collective memory. One summer, a rival rancher attempted to claim part of the prairie. Holloway, older and no less ambitious, returned with a group of hired men, hoping to seize land or at least intimidate Silas. But the family was ready. They had grown into a force united not just by blood, but by shared experience and trust. The confrontation was tense. Holloway rode up with his men, expecting fear or negotiation. Instead, he was met by Silas, standing firm with a rifle slung but unraised, Nayeli at his side, her staff ready and eyes like flint. Tomas and Marisol, along with the younger children, stood nearby, watching intently. "Leave now," Nayeli commanded. "This land is ours, protected by our work, our family, and our courage. There is no gain for you here," Holloway sneered. But his men faltered at the sight of the united family. Silas's quiet presence, Nayeli's calm authority, and the children's resolute faces created a force stronger than words or weapons. Realizing he could not win through intimidation, Holloway withdrew, leaving the prairie and the family intact. The victory was more than defense of land. It was affirmation of all the lessons Silas and Nayeli had taught their children. Courage, patience, unity, and integrity were stronger than any threat. And the story, already growing in Dry Creek, spread beyond its borders, reaching neighboring towns and settlements. As the family gathered around the fire that night, Silas spoke softly. "Every challenge teaches us, every threat shows us what we value most, and every choice we make shapes those who come after us." Nayeli, her hand resting on his, nodded. And in the end, it is love, quiet, steadfast, and true, that guides us through the storms of life. The children, now on the cusp of adulthood, absorbed every word. They had lived through harsh winters, fierce storms, disease, and conflict. They had seen the strength of unity and the power of calm wisdom. They understood, in ways only experience could teach, that life on the prairie demanded endurance, patience, and courage. Years turned into decades. Silas and Nayeli grew older, their hair streaked with silver, their faces marked by lines carved from sun, wind, and laughter. Their children, now capable adults, began to take on responsibilities of their own, guiding parts of the homestead, leading in the town, and teaching the next generation the lessons they had learned. And yet, through all the passage of time, the essence of the family remained unchanged. Silas's quiet strength, once ridiculed, had become a model of leadership and integrity. Nayeli's proud wisdom had shaped not only her children, but the town itself. Together they had forged a life of courage, patience, and love. A life that stood as proof that true strength was found not in boasts or displays of power, but in steadfastness, respect, and fidelity to one's heart. Part 8. The Tides of Fate. The prairie stretched endlessly under the morning sun, waves of gold grass bending to the wind. Silas and Nayeli had grown older, their hair streaked with silver, but their spirits remained steadfast. Life on the frontier was relentless, yet the years had taught them patience, endurance, and the quiet joy of shared labor. Their children, now young adults, had begun carving out their own roles. Thomas managed much of the cattle, learning not only the practical aspects, but also the careful diplomacy required when neighboring ranchers came with disputes or requests. Marisol, guided by Nayeli's wisdom, taught local children the songs and stories of the Apache people, blending them with lessons of the prairie and the land. The youngest children, now teenagers, worked tirelessly beside their parents, learning every lesson etched into the family by years of experience. Dry Creek had grown as well. New businesses opened, a blacksmith's forge, a general store, a small schoolhouse where Marisol occasionally lectured on Apache traditions and local history. The town, once dismissive of Silas and Nayeli, now sought their guidance in disputes, in planning for droughts, and in matters of survival. Even men who had once mocked Silas approached him with respect, nodding silently as he passed in the street. Yet life on the frontier was never without danger. One summer, rumors reached Dry Creek of a band of outlaws moving through the region. They were said to be ruthless, taking what they wanted without regard for life or law. The town's folk grew anxious, and even Silas felt a tight knot of concern in his chest. Nayeli, however, remained calm. "We have faced storms, fires, wolves, and men who sought to steal from us," she said quietly. "Together, we endure. That is how we survive. That is how we live." Preparations began. The family reinforced fences, created hidden escape paths for the cattle, and trained the older children in careful observation. Silas patrolled the perimeter at night, while Nayeli coordinated the younger children and ensured the homestead was ready for any sudden threat. The outlaws arrived under the cover of twilight, their horses moving silently across the prairie. They expected an easy target: isolated homesteads, unprepared families, and little resistance. Yet the family was ready. As the men approached, Silas's rifle cracked the night air, a warning shot, while Nayeli's presence at the front gate, staff in hand, projected authority and calm power. The leader of the gang, a man known as Red Jenkins, sneered. "Looks like we've got ourselves a quiet family. Let's see how quiet they stay when we take what we want." Red's men advanced, but the older children positioned themselves strategically, using the terrain to their advantage. Thomas guided the cattle into hidden enclosures, while Marisol signaled warnings with the Apache songs her mother had taught her, their haunting melodies carrying on the wind to confuse and unnerve the intruders. Hours passed. The outlaws, frustrated and disoriented, attempted to force entry. Each time Silas and Nayeli countered with calm, precise action. Their children supported them, moving like shadows, combining silence with strategy. By dawn, the outlaws were beaten. Not by brute force alone, but by the family's unity, patience, and careful planning. The victory solidified their reputation. Dry Creek marveled not at the strength of arms, but at the power of coordination, courage, and trust. Silas's once ridiculed quietness was now recognized as wisdom. Nayeli's pride and intellect shone as a beacon of authority and leadership. Life returned to normal in the weeks that followed. The children, inspired by their parents' guidance, continued to learn every lesson the land could teach. Thomas became adept at reading weather patterns, predicting storms before they arrived. Marisol mastered the knowledge of herbs, medicines, and healing, her voice carrying Apache songs across the prairie to soothe children and animals alike. The younger children, meanwhile, grew stronger, faster, and more capable with each passing season. One autumn, a new challenge arose. The creek that ran through the property, which had always been a lifeline, began to dry prematurely. Crops suffered, cattle were stressed, and the town grew concerned. Silas and Nayeli spent long days digging trenches, creating water channels, and planning ways to store and ration water efficiently. "You see, children," Nayeli explained one evening, "life tests us in ways we cannot always predict. Our strength lies in our willingness to adapt, to think ahead, and to care for what we love." Thomas, brushing sweat from his brow, nodded. "Father, we will make it through." "We always do." Silas smiled. "Yes, because we endure together." Through this period, the family became an anchor for Dry Creek. Townsfolk came to learn how to store water, protect crops, and ensure livestock survived harsh conditions. The children, once apprentices, now guided others, teaching the next generation the lessons of endurance, courage, and patience. By the time the harsh winter arrived, the homestead had not only survived, but thrived. Snow blanketed the prairie, winds howled through the cottonwoods, and the creek flowed once more, restored by careful planning. Around the fire, Silas and Nayeli reflected on the years that had passed, the storms, the outlaws, the droughts, and the strength that had grown from facing them. "It has been a long road," Silas said quietly, looking into the flames, "but every trial has taught us something important." Nayeli leaned against him, her fingers brushing his, "And every trial has proven our choice was right. Not just in choosing each other, but in choosing to live with patience, courage, and love. That is the legacy we leave our children. Their children, now capable and wise, understood the depth of these lessons. They knew that life on the prairie was not about wealth or reputation, but about character, endurance, and the bonds of family. They carried these lessons into their own endeavors, ensuring that the values Silas and Nayeli had nurtured would persist long after they were gone. And as the fire crackled and the prairie winds whispered through the cottonwoods, the family knew that their lives, once isolated, mocked, and underestimated, had grown into something remarkable. They were a testament to the power of quiet strength, patient love, and enduring courage. Part 9. The Echoes of the Prairie. Spring arrived slowly, as if the prairie itself hesitated after the long winter. The frost melted, revealing tender shoots of green, and the creek gurgled with renewed vigor. Silas and Nayeli, older now, watched as their homestead stirred to life. The children, each maturing into capable young adults, had taken on many responsibilities. Yet, as always, the land demanded vigilance, patience, and foresight. Thomas had begun overseeing the herd, guiding the cattle across rolling fields and ensuring they remained healthy. His movements were precise, learned from years of shadowing his father, but with a growing independence. Marisol, now nearly grown, taught younger children from neighboring homesteads the ways of Apache healing and the wisdom of the land. She walked the prairie with a quiet authority, her presence commanding respect. One morning, Silas noticed tracks near the northern boundary that he did not recognize. They were heavy, deliberate, and recent. He followed them with care, calling Nayeli to his side. Together, they examined the tracks, a small band of men, moving cautiously, likely looking for cattle or other resources. "They are not familiar," Silas said quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to be ready." Nayeli nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of a small blade at her belt. "We will face them, as we always have, with patience, strategy, and unity." The family began preparations. The older children helped reinforce fences and barricades, while the younger ones were taught to spot threats from a distance. Silas and Nayeli trained them to observe the land for signs of intrusion, to understand the subtle hints left by others, and to act with calm precision. That evening, a rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. He carried a message. A neighboring rancher had seen a group of strangers moving through the region, and the town of Dry Creek might soon be affected. The family gathered, listening intently as Silas read the letter aloud. "They mean to test us," he said, "not by force alone, but by fear. But fear has no power here. Only knowledge, preparation, and courage will see us through." Over the following days, the family worked tirelessly. Tomas patrolled the perimeter with his father, while Marisol organized the younger children to ensure the livestock and crops were secure. Nayeli's knowledge of strategy and observation proved invaluable, guiding their actions and keeping the children calm and focused. When the strangers finally appeared, they expected to find scattered homesteads and unprepared families. Instead, they were met with a united household, ready for any challenge. Silas's steady presence, Nayeli's sharp command, and the children's careful execution created a formidable defense. The encounter was brief, but decisive. The strangers, seeing the cohesion and skill of the family, realized they could not succeed by intimidation or force. Without a fight, they withdrew, leaving the prairie and the homestead untouched. The town of Dry Creek, hearing of the incident, began to regard Silas and Nayeli with even greater respect. The family's reputation had grown beyond the borders of the town, spreading across the prairie as a story of courage, wisdom, and unity. Despite the growing recognition, Silas and Nayeli remained humble. They continued their daily work, teaching their children the values of patience, endurance, and love. The land remained the center of their lives, as it had always been, and they never allowed pride or fame to interfere with their responsibilities. One afternoon, Marisol approached her parents with a question that had been on her mind for some time. "Mother, Father," she began, "do you ever regret the choices that brought us here? The hard work, the dangers, the isolation?" Silas looked at her, his eyes calm and steady. "Regret is a luxury we cannot afford," he said. "Every challenge, every hardship, every joy has shaped us. Without them, we would not be the family we are today." Nayeli added, "And every choice has been guided by love. Love for each other, for the land, and for the life we build together." That is a reward greater than any comfort or ease. The children reflected on their parents' words, understanding that the essence of the prairie was not wealth, fame, or conquest, but the lessons learned through endurance, cooperation, and care. As the months passed, the family faced smaller challenges: a calf born weak, needing careful tending, a patch of crops threatened by insects, and disputes among neighboring ranchers over grazing rights. Each situation tested their skills, judgment, and unity, yet they navigated each with calm authority. Silas and Nayeli watched with quiet pride as their children handled these responsibilities, guiding others in the town and demonstrating the lessons that had been imparted over decades. Dry Creek, once a town of mockery and doubt, now thrived under the guidance of families who had learned from Silas and Nayeli's example. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the prairie glowed in deep orange and gold, Silas and Nayeli stood side by side, watching their children move through the fields. "It is remarkable," Nayeli said softly, "how far we have come, from strangers on the edge of the prairie to the heart of a town and a family that spans generations." Silas nodded, his eyes tracing the line of fences, the flow of the creek, and the movement of the cattle. "And yet, it is not the town, nor the fences, nor the livestock that define us. It is the choices we made, the love we shared, and the courage to endure through every storm." The prairie stretched endlessly before them, a vast canvas of possibility, danger, and beauty. And Silas and Nayeli, standing together, understood that their lives, once marked by isolation and mockery, had grown into something enduring, profound, and unshakable. Part 10. The legacy of the prairie years had passed, and the prairie had changed once again. The winds carried whispers of distant fires, of settlers moving west, and of new challenges waiting beyond the horizon. Silas and Nayeli, now older and seasoned by decades of labor, watched their children flourish. The homestead, once small and vulnerable, had grown into a thriving center of life and learning. Tomas had taken the lead on the ranch, handling the herd with the patience and precision of his father. Marisol guided the younger children and neighboring homesteads in the ways of healing, wisdom, and care for the land. Each child had become capable, not just through skill, but through understanding, knowing that true strength came from persistence, respect, and unity. One summer, a harsh drought tested Dry Creek. The creek that had always sustained them ran low, and the fields cracked under the relentless sun. Other ranchers grew desperate, selling cattle at losses or abandoning land altogether. Silas and Nayeli, though weathered, faced the challenge as they had all others, together, calmly, with steadfast resolve. "We will endure," Silas said to his children, his voice steady. "Not because the prairie is merciful, but because we are prepared, united, and willing to adapt." Naili added, "Courage and patience have always been our guides. And love. Love binds our family, our work, and our community." Never forget that the children worked tirelessly, creating water channels, rationing supplies, and guiding the cattle to the few remaining green pastures. Days turned into nights, and nights into weeks, but the family endured. The town watched, inspired, learning that survival was not only about labor, but about wisdom, foresight, and unity. Finally, after weeks of careful work, rain returned to the prairie. The creek swelled, crops revived, and the herd regained strength. Dry Creek had survived, stronger than before, and the family's legacy grew even larger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Silas and Nayeli stood together on the porch, watching the fields shimmer in golden light. "Do you remember," Nayeli said softly, "how small and uncertain it all seemed when I first arrived?" Silas smiled, taking her hand. "I remember." And yet it was not smallness or uncertainty that defined us. It was our choice to endure, to care, and to remain true to one another. That choice brought us here. The children approached, each now fully grown, capable, and wise. Thomas, Marisol, and the younger siblings had inherited not only skills, but the quiet courage and integrity of their parents. They had learned that the prairie did not favor the loudest or strongest, but those who worked with patience, humility, and love. The family shared a moment of quiet pride, knowing that the lessons of a lifetime were now living in the next generation. Silas's once ridiculed innocence, Nayeli's fierce pride and wisdom, and the endurance that had guided them all, these had become a legacy far greater than any material wealth. As night fell, the prairie stretched endlessly before them, the stars piercing the dark like the fires of hope and resilience that burned within their hearts. Dry Creek slept under the protective watch of a family that had turned struggle into triumph, ridicule into respect, and isolation into community. The story of Silas and Nayeli, once whispered as a tale of the unexpected, became legend. A quiet rancher, and a proud Apache woman who endured storms, outlaws, drought, and doubt, building a life not through boastful conquest, but through patient courage, love, and unity. Travelers carried the tale across the prairie. Children learned it in schools, and neighbors spoke of it with reverence. In the end, it was never the hardships that defined them, nor the opinions of those who mocked or doubted. It was the quiet choice to be steadfast, to love, and to endure together. That choice, unshakable and true, had built not just a homestead, but a life of meaning, and a story that would endure long after the prairie winds had carried their names across the horizon. Silas and Nayeli, hand in hand, watched the prairie, the wind whispering through the grass, the night sky above, and knew, as they always had, that true strength is quiet, love is patient, and the heart that remains steadfast is the one that endures beyond all trials. And so, the quiet rancher and the proud Apache woman, once underestimated and mocked, left behind a legacy of courage, patience, and love, proof that sometimes the world's overlooked virtues are the very ones that shape history, hearts, and generations to come.